The courtroom smelled like old wood polish and broken promises. I sat perfectly still in the defendant's chair, my hands folded on the mahogany table, watching Judge Catherine Meridian review the documents before her. Across the aisle, my husband Marcus sat with his attorney, that smug half-smile playing at his lips. The one I'd once found charming during our college years. Back when I thought confidence and arrogance were the same thing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Your Honor, Marcus's attorney, Gerald Hutchinson, stood with practiced ease. My client has been more than generous in his settlement offer. Mrs. Chen has contributed nothing to the marriage financially. She hasn't worked in 7 years, has no marketable skills, and frankly, has lived off my client's success as a pharmaceutical executive. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the one that had become my constant companion over the past 3 years. My attorney, Diana Foster, squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture of support that had become routine during our strategy sessions. Mrs. Chen is seeking an equitable division of marital assets, Diana began, rising from her seat. She's entitled to— Entitled? Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Judge Meridian's eyes snapped up, but he continued before she could intervene. Your Honor, my wife is stupid if she thinks she deserves half of what I built. She sat at home doing nothing while I worked 80-hour weeks building my career. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Stupid. In front of the judge, the court reporter, the bailiff, and Diana. Not whispered in private during one of our fights, not muttered under his breath after too much wine. Spoken clearly, deliberately on the record. Diana's hand tightened on mine, a silent message. Steady. Judge Meridian removed her glasses slowly, her expression unreadable. Mr. Chen, you will address this court with respect, and you will refer to the opposing party as Mrs. Chen or the plaintiff. Is that clear? Of course, Your Honor, Marcus replied smoothly, not even having the decency to look chastened. I apologize, but the facts remain. My wife has no claim to assets she didn't help acquire. Something inside me crystallized in that moment. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. For 7 years, I'd absorbed his comments, his dismissals, his slow erosion of my sense of worth. And now he'd done it publicly, on record, in front of a judge who would determine our future. Diana stood again, and I noticed something different in her posture. Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess before we proceed with the asset division discussion. New information has come to light that may significantly impact these proceedings. Judge Meridian studied Diana for a long moment. Very well. We'll reconvene in 20 minutes. In the small conference room down the hall, Diana pulled out her laptop and a thick folder I'd never seen before. Her usual calm demeanor had shifted into something sharper, more predatory. Evelyn, she said, using my first name instead of the formal Mrs. Chen she employed in court. I need you to trust me right now. What I'm about to tell you will change everything, but I need your permission to proceed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My heart hammered against my ribs. What is it? 3 weeks ago, you mentioned that Marcus had been taking frequent business trips to Austin. You said he'd been meeting with potential investors for a startup venture. I nodded, remembering the nights he'd come home late, smelling of expensive restaurants, and justifying his absence with talk of revolutionary medical devices and venture capital. I hired a private investigator, Diana continued, standard procedure in high-asset divorces. What we found goes far beyond a simple affair, though there is that too. She pulled out a series of photographs, Marcus with a woman I didn't recognize. Entering hotels, sitting close at restaurant tables. The images should have hurt, but I felt oddly detached, as if watching someone else's marriage dissolve. But that's not the bombshell, Diana said, pulling out financial documents. The startup Marcus has been working on? It's called MedTech Innovations. According to corporate filings, it was established 8 months ago. He never told me about starting a company, I said quietly. That's because officially, he didn't start it. Look at the incorporation documents. She pointed to a name on the paperwork, and my breath caught. The company had been registered under my name. Evelyn Patricia Chen, listed as founder and CEO. I don't understand, I whispered. I never signed anything. Exactly. Diana's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. This is fraud, Evelyn. Identity theft. Corporate fraud. And it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. MedTech Innovations received a $3 million investment last month from a venture capital firm. That money went directly into accounts Marcus controls, using your identity. The room seemed to tilt sideways. $3 million? Hidden from marital asset declarations, hidden from you, all while using your name and social security number. If this company fails or engages in any illegal activity, you'd be the one held legally responsible. Diana leaned forward. But here's the truly beautiful part. Because the company is in your name. Legally, you own it. Every share, every asset, every dollar. I stared at the documents, my mind racing to catch up with the implications. Marcus had used me as a shield, a legal dummy corporation, thinking I was too stupid, there was that word again, to ever find out. What happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Now? Now we go back into that courtroom, and I detonate this bomb right in the middle of his smug face. Diana began organizing documents. With your permission, of course. Once we reveal this, there's no going back. Marcus will face criminal charges for fraud and identity theft. His career in pharmaceuticals will be over. Companies don't hire executives with fraud convictions. And you'll own a startup company worth at least $3 million. I thought about the word stupid, echoing in the courtroom. Thought about 7 years of being dismissed, minimized, erased. Thought about him using my identity while simultaneously claiming I'd contributed nothing. Do it, I said. The 20-minute recess stretched to 30 as Diana made several phone calls I couldn't quite hear. When we returned to the courtroom, I noticed 2 additional people had entered. A woman in a dark suit who introduced herself as Agent Patricia Morrison from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, and a man who simply nodded at Diana and took a seat in the gallery. Marcus noticed them too. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Your Honor, Diana began as Judge Meridian called us to order. Before we proceed with the asset division discussion, I need to introduce evidence of previously undisclosed marital assets, as well as evidence of fraud that may require criminal investigation. Gerald Hutchinson was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, we've provided complete financial disclosure. This is a desperate attempt to— Mr. Hutchinson, Judge Meridian interrupted, her tone icy. Sit down, Ms. Foster, proceed. Diana projected documents onto the courtroom screen. 3 months ago, a company called MedTech Innovations was incorporated in Delaware. The registered agent and CEO is listed as Evelyn Patricia Chen, my client. Marcus's face had gone pale. Gerald was frantically whispering to him. Mrs. Chen never signed any incorporation documents. She has never been involved in this company's operations. In fact, she had no knowledge of its existence until this week. Diana advanced to the next slide. Bank statements showing massive transfers. However, her husband, Marcus Chen, has been operating this company using her identity, her social security number, and her name to secure investments and open bank accounts. Your Honor, this is absurd, Gerald began. Is it? Diana pulled out another document. This is Mrs. Chen's signature from her marriage license. And this, she displayed another document, is the signature on the MedTech Innovations Incorporation papers. They don't match because Marcus forged his wife's signature. Agent Morrison stood. Your Honor, the FBI has been investigating potential investment fraud related to several shell companies in the medical device sector. If what Ms. Foster is presenting is accurate, we'll need to take Mr. Chen in for questioning. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gerald was shouting about procedure and chain of evidence. Marcus had gone from pale to gray, his hands gripping the table. Judge Meridian banged her gavel 3 times. Order! Everyone sit down now, She turned to Diana. Miss Foster, you're making very serious allegations. I have documentation, Your Honor, corporate filings, bank records, handwriting analysis, and testimony from the venture capital firm that invested $3 million in a company they believed was owned and operated by Mrs. Chen. Diana's voice was calm, professional, devastating. Mr. Chen has been committing identity, theft and corporate fraud while simultaneously arguing in this divorce proceeding that his wife has no financial acumen and contributed nothing to the marriage. Judge Meridian turned to Marcus, her expression hardening. Mr. Chen, do you have anything to say? Marcus looked at Gerald, who shook his head sharply, a lawyer's warning not to speak. But Marcus, in his arrogance, couldn't help himself. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. Evelyn knew about the company. She must have forgotten. She's always been forgetful about business matters. I was trying to protect her from the liability by forging her signature and hiding $3 million in assets during a divorce proceeding. Judge Meridian's voice could have frozen water. Mr. Chen, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise it. I can explain, Marcus started. Mr. Chen! Gerald physically put his hand on Marcus's arm. Stop talking. But the damage was done. On the record, Marcus had essentially admitted to forging documents and hiding assets. Agent Morrison was already on her phone, speaking quietly to someone about warrants. Diana turned to me, her expression calm but her eyes blazing with triumph. Mrs. Chen, did you know about MedTech Innovations before this week? No, I said clearly. I had no idea. Did you sign any incorporation documents or open any bank accounts for this company? No, I did not. Did your husband ever ask your permission to use your identity for business purposes? Never, Judge Meridian was writing rapidly. Ms. Foster, I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all accounts associated with MedTech Innovations pending a full forensic audit. I'm also ordering Mr. Chen to surrender his passport. She fixed Marcus with a stare that could melt steel. You called your wife stupid in my courtroom, Mr. Chen. You claimed she contributed nothing while you built your career. And all the while, you were using her name, her identity, her legal standing to commit fraud. The irony is not lost on me. Gerald was pulling Marcus toward the hallway, probably to prevent him from saying anything else incriminating. As they passed our table, Marcus's eyes met mine. The smugness was gone, replaced by something between fury and fear. Evelyn, he said, his voice low and urgent. You don't understand what you're doing. That company is mine. The investors, the contracts, everything is based on my work, my reputation. That's registered in my name, I replied softly. Your work, built on my identity, which makes it legally mine. You taught me that actions have consequences, Marcus. I'm just a good student. Agent Morrison approached our table. Mrs. Chen, I'll need you to come to our field office tomorrow to provide a formal statement and review the evidence we've been collecting. You're a victim here, not a suspect, but we need your cooperation. Of course, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. As Marcus and Gerald disappeared into the hallway, I could hear Marcus's raised voice. Fix this. I pay you to fix things like this. Diana packed up her laptop, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. The preliminary hearing is continued until next week, but I suspect Mr. Chen will be much more amenable to settlement discussions once he understands the full scope of his legal exposure. What happens now? I asked, the reality beginning to sink in. Now? Now you go home and get some rest. Tomorrow you meet with Agent Morrison. By the end of the week, Marcus will likely be arrested for fraud and identity theft. His assets will be frozen pending investigation. And you, she handed me a folder, will need to hire a corporate attorney to help you navigate being the sudden CEO of a medical device startup. I don't know anything about running a company. I protested. Maybe not. But you know enough to hire people who do. And Marcus thought you were too stupid to figure out what he was doing. Diana closed her briefcase. Never let someone mistake patience for weakness, Evelyn. You've been underestimated your entire marriage. Time to show them what a mistake that was. The drive home felt surreal. I kept expecting to wake up, to find out this was some elaborate dream. But the folder of documents on my passenger seat was real. The business card from Agent Morrison was real. The recording of Marcus calling me stupid in open court was real. I pulled into the driveway of the house we'd bought 5 years ago, the house Marcus always referred to as his house, never ours. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Coffee cup in the sink, half-read book on the side table. The ordinary remnants of an ordinary life that had just become extraordinarily complicated. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Don't do something you'll regret." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Then I blocked his number. Another text came through, this time from Diana. "News travels fast. Gerald already called about settlement talks. Sleep well. You've earned it." I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. In the distance, I could hear children playing, lawn mowers humming, the ordinary sounds of suburban life continuing despite the earthquake that had just fractured my world. Somewhere across town, Marcus was probably panicking, calling lawyers, trying to figure out how to contain the disaster he'd created. Part of me, the part that had loved him once, before the erosion of respect and kindness, felt a twinge of something like regret. But then I remembered his face in the courtroom, the casual cruelty with which he'd called me stupid, the years of being dismissed and minimized. I thought about him using my name to build his secret empire, assuming I'd never be smart enough to discover it. My phone buzzed again. This time, an email from someone named Richard Yamamoto, introducing himself as the lead investor in MedTech Innovations. He wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the company's future and his concerns about the current situation. I finished my wine and went inside to my laptop. Time to start researching exactly what kind of company I'd just inherited, and what Marcus had been building with my stolen identity. The MedTech Innovations website was professional, slick, full of promises about revolutionary medical devices for remote patient monitoring. The team page featured several impressive-looking executives, none of them Marcus, interestingly enough. He'd kept himself completely off the public face of the company while putting my name on all the legal documents. Smart, in a criminal sort of way. If the company failed or faced lawsuits, I'd be the one held responsible while he remained safely anonymous in the background. I pulled up the corporate filings Diana had provided. Besides the $3 million in venture capital, there were contracts with 2 major hospital systems for beta testing, a lease on office space in downtown Austin, and payroll records for 12 employees. 12 people whose jobs now depended on a company that had been built on fraud, owned by a woman who knew nothing about medical devices, funded by investors who thought they'd been dealing with a legitimate operation. The weight of it crashed over me all at once. This wasn't just about Marcus getting his comeuppance. Real people, innocent people, were caught in the blast radius. My phone rang. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Chen? This is Richard Yamamoto. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from the corporate filings." His voice was cultured, concerned. "I wanted to reach out personally before the lawyers get involved. There are some things you need to know about MedTech Innovations." "I'm listening," I said, my heart hammering. "First, I want you to know that our due diligence on the company was thorough. We believed we were investing in a legitimate operation with solid technology and a qualified leadership team. If your attorney's allegations are true, if Marcus Chen was operating this company using your identity without your knowledge, then we've been defrauded as badly as you have." "The allegations are true," I said quietly. "I had no idea this company existed." A long pause. "Then we have a problem. Our investment was based on representations that the CEO, you, supposedly, had a background in healthcare administration and medical device development. Obviously, if that's not true, we need to reassess." "Obviously," I agreed, a bitter taste in my mouth. "What kind of representations?" "According to the pitch materials, you had 10 years of experience in hospital operations and had identified critical gaps in patient monitoring systems. You had relationships with major hospital administrators and understood the regulatory landscape. Another pause. I'm guessing none of that is accurate? I was an art history major, I said. I haven't worked in 7 years. Before that, I was a museum curator. Jesus, Yamamoto breathed. This is worse than I thought. Mrs. Chen, I need to be direct with you. If this fraud comes to light publicly, our fund will have to write this investment off as a total loss. We can't be associated with a criminal operation. I understand, I said, though I didn't really understand anything at that point. However, he continued, and I heard a shift in his tone. The technology itself is sound. The team Marcus assembled is talented. The market opportunity is real. If the company were run by someone legitimate, someone ethical, it could actually succeed. But that's not me, I said. I don't know anything about medical devices or hospital systems or... No, but you could learn. Or you could hire someone who does know and step back into a board position. I heard papers rustling. Mrs. Chen, I'm not trying to pressure you. You've been victimized here and you don't owe me or anyone else anything. But I want you to understand that there's a possibility here, a chance to turn something fraudulent into something legitimate. It's entirely up to you whether you want to explore that possibility. After he hung up, I sat in the darkening living room, thinking about choices and consequences. Marcus had built this trap for me, assuming I'd never discover it. But now that I had, I could either let the whole thing collapse, taking 12 jobs and $3 million in investment with it, or I could try to salvage something from the wreckage. The old Evelyn, the one who'd let Marcus diminish her for 7 years, would have walked away. Let the lawyers handle it, taken a settlement, disappeared back into comfortable obscurity. But that Evelyn had died somewhere between Marcus calling her stupid and Diana revealing his fraud. The woman sitting in this darkened living room was someone different. Someone angry. Someone who'd been underestimated for the last time. I opened my laptop and started searching for corporate attorneys who specialized in medical device companies. The next morning, I arrived at the FBI field office at 9 sharp. Agent Morrison met me in the lobby, her expression professional but not unkind. Thank you for coming in. Mrs. Chen, I know this is overwhelming. She led me through security checkpoints and down a series of corridors to a small conference room. I want to walk you through what we've discovered and get your statement on the record. For the next 2 hours, I answered questions, reviewed documents, and slowly pieced together the full scope of what Marcus had done. He'd used my social security number to apply for business licenses, forged my signature on bank documents, created fake email accounts in my name to communicate with investors and partners, built an entire corporate identity around someone who didn't exist, the competent, experienced version of me that lived only in his fraudulent paperwork. The good news, Agent Morrison said, is that you're clearly a victim here. We have abundant evidence of the forgery and fraud. The bad news is that untangling this mess will take time, and in the meantime, you're legally responsible for a company you didn't know existed. Richard Yamamoto called me last night, I said. The lead investor. We've spoken with him as well. He's understandably concerned. She pulled out another file. There's something else you need to know. MedTech Innovations isn't Marcus's first attempt at this scheme. She laid out documents from 3 years earlier. Another company, another forged signature, though not mine this time. A woman named Patricia Brennan had been listed as CEO of a company called HealthStream Analytics. The company had failed, leaving Patricia with $200,000 in business debt she'd never authorized. Patricia tried to press charges, Agent Morrison continued. But at the time, Marcus had better lawyers and convinced prosecutors it was a civil matter, not criminal. Patricia settled for having the debt discharged, but it destroyed her credit and left her with legal bills she's still paying off. I stared at Patricia Brennan's signature, forged just like mine. He's done this before. We believe so. And with your case, we finally have enough evidence to make criminal charges stick. Agent Morrison leaned forward. I want to be clear about something, Mrs. Chen. If you decide to walk away from MedTech Innovations, no one would blame you. But if you choose to try to legitimize the company, you'll be helping us build a stronger case against Marcus. We'd have evidence that the company can function without his involvement, which proves he was using you as a fraudulent figurehead. And the employees? I asked. The 12 people who work there? Most of them had no idea about the fraud. They're innocent parties who'll lose their jobs if the company folds. She shrugged. That's not your responsibility. But it might factor into your decision. As I left the FBI building, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Brennan. Agent Morrison gave me your contact info. Can we talk? I called her from my car. Mrs. Chen, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I've been waiting 3 years for this. For someone to believe me about what Marcus did. We met for coffee at a quiet place downtown. Patricia was in her mid-40s, professional but worn-looking, with the exhausted expression of someone who'd fought too many uphill battles. He destroyed me, she said simply, stirring sugar into her coffee. I was a healthcare consultant. Had my own small practice, good reputation, solid clients. Then suddenly I was being sued for debts I never incurred. My credit was ruined. Clients dropped me because who wants to work with someone facing bankruptcy? I'm so sorry, I said, and meant it. The worst part was everyone thought I was lying. Marcus had all these documents with my signature. Had business partners who swore they'd dealt with me directly. Except it wasn't me. It was someone he'd paid to impersonate me. She looked up, her eyes fierce. When I heard what he did to you, what Agent Morrison found, I cried. Because finally, someone might actually face consequences. How did he get your information? I asked. Your social security number, your signature? We dated briefly years ago. Before he met you, actually. Patricia's laugh was bitter. I broke up with him when I realized he was only interested in what I could do for his career. He seemed fine with it at the time. I never imagined he'd kept copies of my documents from when we were together. The implications hit me like ice water. Marcus had been planning this for years. Had kept documentation from previous relationships as tools for future fraud. Had probably been studying me, collecting my information, waiting for the right opportunity. You need to know something, Patricia continued. Marcus doesn't lose. Not in his mind. He'll come after you with everything he has. Charm, threats, manipulation, whatever works. He'll try to make you think you're crazy, that you misunderstood, that this is somehow your fault. He already tried, I said, thinking of his text. I blocked his number. Good, but he won't stop there. He'll use mutual friends, family members, anyone he can leverage. That's what he did to me. Convinced people I was having a breakdown, that I was making false accusations because the breakup was bitter. She finished her coffee. I'm telling you this not to scare you, but to prepare you. You have something I didn't. Hard evidence, FBI support, and apparently a really good lawyer. Use every advantage you have because he will use everything against you. After Patricia left, I sat in the coffee shop for a long time, watching people go about their ordinary days. A month ago, I'd been one of them, blissfully unaware of the trap closing around me. Now I was at the center of a federal fraud investigation, the unwilling CEO of a medical device company, and the target of a man who'd spent years carefully constructing my role as his legal scapegoat. My phone rang. Diana. The FBI called me, she said without preamble. They've got enough to arrest Marcus, but they're waiting on a few more pieces of evidence. Probably early next week. Good, I said. There's more. Gerald called. Marcus wants to meet face to face. Just you and him, no lawyers. He says he can explain everything. Absolutely not. That's what I told him. Diana paused. But I wanted to warn you. He's going to try other ways to reach you. The FBI suggested you might want to stay somewhere else for a few days. Somewhere he won't expect. The thought of leaving my home, the home I'd lived in for 5 years, the space I'd cultivated and decorated and made mine, filled me with rage. Marcus had taken so much already. Now he was taking my sense of safety too. I'm not running, I said. Let him come. I'll call the police if he shows up. Evelyn, Diana, I've been running from conflict our entire marriage. Making myself smaller, quieter, less challenging. I'm done. I stood up, gathering my things. He wants to explain? He can explain to the FBI and then to a jury. That night, I changed all the locks on the house, installed new security cameras covering every entrance, updated my will and my emergency contacts. If Marcus was coming, I'd be ready, but he didn't come. Instead, around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother-in-law, Helen. "Evelyn, honey, Marcus told me what's happening. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. He's a good boy. He'd never do what they're accusing him of. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, reading between the lines. Marcus had already started his campaign, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive wife and an overzealous justice system. Helen, who'd always treated me with polite distance, was now reaching out with sympathy. For her son, not for me. I didn't respond. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of inevitability. I sat in the corporate attorney's office. A woman named Rebecca Lawson, who specialized in medical device companies and came highly recommended by Diana. Her corner office overlooked the city, all glass and steel and the kind of quiet power that came from knowing exactly what you were worth. "Let me be frank. Mrs. Chen," Rebecca said, reviewing the documents I'd brought, "this is a legal nightmare. You're the CEO of record for a company built on fraud, funded by investors who were deceived, employing people who had no idea their jobs were founded on identity theft. Even though you're a victim, you're also legally liable for every decision this company makes moving forward." "I understand," I said, though the weight of it pressed against my chest like a stone. "Do you?" Rebecca leaned forward, her expression serious. "Because here's what happens if you try to run this company. You'll need to disclose the fraud to all stakeholders, investors, partners, employees. Some will walk away immediately. You'll face potential lawsuits from people who feel deceived. The FDA regulatory process will scrutinize everything more carefully because of the criminal investigation. And Marcus will almost certainly try to sabotage you from the sidelines. And if I walk away, the company collapses. 12 people lose their jobs. The investors lose $3 million. And Marcus gets to tell his version of the story, that his hysterical wife destroyed a viable business out of spite." Rebecca sat back. "Neither option is good, Mrs. Chen. The question is which bad option you can live with." I thought about Patricia Brennan, still paying off legal bills 3 years later because Marcus had used her identity and faced no consequences. Thought about those 12 employees whose only crime was accepting jobs at what they believed was a legitimate company. "If I try to save it," I asked carefully, "what would that look like?" Rebecca pulled out a legal pad and began sketching an organizational structure. "First, you bring in an interim CEO, someone with healthcare experience who can run day-to-day operations while you maintain oversight as chairman of the board. Second, you're completely transparent with investors and employees about what happened. Some will leave, but honesty might convince others to stay. Third, you cooperate fully with the FBI investigation to distance yourself from Marcus's fraud. And fourth, you bring in independent auditors to verify the company's technology and claims are legitimate." That sounds expensive. It is. You'd need to invest probably another $500,000 just to stabilize things. Rebecca tapped her pen against the pad. But here's the interesting part. Richard Yamamoto called me this morning. Said if you're serious about legitimizing the company, his fund would consider increasing their investment to support the transition. He's already done some due diligence on the technology itself, separate from Marcus's fraud, and he believes it has real potential. My phone buzzed. A text from Diana. "Marcus arrested this morning. Gerald called. Wants to discuss settlement before arraignment tomorrow." I showed the message to Rebecca, who smiled grimly. "That changes the timeline. Once he's arraigned, everything becomes public record. If you're going to make a decision about medtech innovations, you need to make it now, before the media circus begins." I looked out the window at the city below, thinking about choices and consequences. The old Evelyn would have taken the safe path, walk away, take a settlement, let someone else clean up the mess. But the old Evelyn had died in that courtroom when Marcus called her stupid. "I want to save it," I said. "Not for Marcus, not even for me. For the people he used as pawns in his fraud. They deserve better than to be collateral damage." Rebecca nodded, unsurprised. "Then we have work to do. I'll start vetting potential interim CEOs today. You should schedule meetings with Yamamoto and the other investors as soon as possible. And Mrs. Chen? She fixed me with a penetrating stare. Once you commit to this path, there's no backing out. You'll be public, visible, vulnerable. Everyone will have an opinion about what you should do. Are you ready for that? I thought about 7 years of making myself invisible, of shrinking to fit Marcus's narrative of who I should be. I've been invisible long enough. The afternoon was a blur of phone calls and meetings. Richard Yamamoto agreed to meet the next day. Rebecca began reaching out to her network of healthcare executives. Diana sent over the details of Marcus's arraignment, scheduled for 10 a.m. the following morning. Around 3 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the new security camera, I saw Helen Chen standing on my porch, looking older and more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Evelyn," she said, her voice catching. "Thank you for seeing me." I led her to the living room but didn't offer coffee or tea. This wasn't a social call. "They arrested Marcus this morning," Helen said, twisting her hands in her lap. "Identity theft, fraud, forgery. His bail hearing isn't until tomorrow. They're treating him like a criminal." "He is a criminal," I said quietly. "He forged my signature, used my identity to commit fraud, and hid millions of dollars in assets. But surely there's been some misunderstanding. Marcus said you knew about the company, that you agreed to be listed as CEO for tax purposes. Helen, he's lying." I pulled out my phone and showed her the incorporation documents with the forged signature. "This isn't my handwriting. I never signed these papers. I never agreed to anything." She stared at the documents, her face crumbling. "But he's my son. He's a good boy. He wouldn't—" "He did this to another woman 3 years ago," I interrupted. "Patricia Brennan. Same scheme, same fraud. She tried to press charges, but he convinced everyone she was lying." I leaned forward. "Helen, I know he's your son, but he's also a man who's been lying to both of us for years. What do you want me to say?" Helen's voice rose, defensive now. "That my son is a monster? That I raised someone who could do something like this? I want you to stop making excuses for him." I stood up, suddenly exhausted. "I want you to acknowledge that your son committed crimes, hurt people, and needs to face consequences." "But I don't think you're capable of that, are you?" Helen stood as well, her face flushed. "You're enjoying this. You're getting revenge because Marcus wanted a divorce, because he found someone else." "He called me stupid in a courtroom," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut. "He spent 7 years making me feel worthless, while simultaneously using my identity to build his criminal enterprise. And now he's facing the consequences of his own choices. That's not revenge, Helen. That's justice." She left without another word, her dignity wrapped around her like armor against uncomfortable truths. Through the window, I watched her car disappear down the street, and felt the final thread of connection to Marcus's family snap cleanly. That evening, I drove to the office space MedTech Innovations leased in downtown Austin. I'd scheduled a meeting with the company's operations manager, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kowalski, who'd been running day-to-day operations while Marcus played CEO from the shadows. Sarah met me in the lobby, her expression guarded. She was in her late 30s with the efficient competence of someone who'd learned to get things done despite obstacles. "Mrs. Chen," she said, extending her hand. "I have to admit, I'm confused about what's happening. Marcus said there were some legal issues, but no one's told us anything concrete. I'd prepared for this conversation with Rebecca's guidance, but the reality of it still made my stomach clench." We rode the elevator to the 3rd floor in silence, entering an open office space where a handful of people were still working despite the late hour. "Conference room?" I suggested, and Sarah nodded. Once the door closed, I laid out the truth as clearly and directly as I could. The fraud, the forged documents, Marcus's arrest, my complete lack of involvement until a week ago. Sarah's face went through several emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally a kind of grim acceptance. "I knew something was wrong," she said finally. "Marcus was never here. All our strategic decisions came through email or encrypted messages. He'd show up for investor meetings, play the charismatic leader, then disappear for weeks. I kept asking to meet with you, the supposed CEO, and he always had excuses. I'm sorry, I said, though the apology felt inadequate. What happens now? Sarah asked. To the company? To the team? That depends on several factors. But I want to be clear, I'm not Marcus. I don't know anything about medical devices or healthcare systems. I'm an art history major who hasn't worked in 7 years. I met her eyes directly. But I'm trying to do the right thing, which means being honest with you and everyone else about the situation. Sarah studied me for a long moment. The technology is solid. The device we've developed for remote patient monitoring actually works. We've got 2 hospital systems ready to start beta testing next month. If the company collapses because of Marcus's fraud, we lose everything, not just our jobs, but the chance to actually help patients. I know, I said. That's why I'm here. I'm bringing in an interim CEO with healthcare experience. I'm being transparent with investors about the fraud. And I'm asking you, would you be willing to stay to help salvage this, even knowing how it started? Under what conditions? Sarah asked, her business mind clearly working through the implications. Complete transparency, independent audits of all our technology and claims, new governance structures to ensure nothing like this happens again. And you'd report to the interim CEO, not to me. I'll maintain board oversight, but I won't pretend to know how to run a medical device company. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I need to think about it, and I need to talk to the team. Some of them have families, mortgages, kids in college. They deserve to make informed decisions. Of course, I stood. I'm scheduling a company-wide meeting for Thursday morning. By then, I should have more concrete information about the path forward. As I drove home, my phone rang. Diana's number. The arraignment is set for 10 a.m. tomorrow, she said without preamble. Gerald is pushing for reduced bail, claiming Marcus isn't a flight risk. The prosecutor is arguing otherwise, given the money involved and Marcus's resources. Will I need to be there? Not required, but it might be strategic. The judge will see that you're cooperating with the investigation, that you're clearly a victim and not a co-conspirator. Diana paused. Evelyn, you should also know, Gerald filed a motion claiming you're trying to steal Marcus's intellectual property, that the company was always meant to be his, and you're exploiting a technicality to take over his work. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. He forged my signature and used my identity to commit fraud, but I'm the one exploiting technicalities? That's his argument. It won't hold up legally. The evidence is too clear. But he's going to fight this publicly, try to paint you as vindictive and opportunistic. Diana's voice softened. Are you prepared for that? For your name to be in the news? For people to take sides? For this to become public spectacle? I thought about Helen's visit, her desperate need to believe her son was innocent. Thought about the text messages still coming from Marcus's friends, asking me to be reasonable and work this out privately. Thought about 7 years of being told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that I should be grateful for what I had and stop asking for more. Let them talk, I said. I know the truth. The FBI knows the truth. That's enough. But it wasn't enough, not really. Because the next morning, as I sat in the courtroom watching Marcus's arraignment, I discovered just how vicious the court of public opinion could be. Marcus entered in handcuffs, looking haggard but defiant. Gerald stood beside him, radiating expensive competence. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Reeves, laid out the charges methodically. Multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, forgery, and wire fraud for the interstate financial transactions. Your Honor, Gerald began, his voice smooth as silk. My client is a respected pharmaceutical executive with deep ties to this community. He's not a flight risk. This is a civil matter that's been criminalized by an angry spouse seeking revenge after discovering her husband's infidelity. Mr. Hutchinson, Judge Meridian said dryly, the same judge from the divorce hearing, the FBI has provided substantial evidence of criminal fraud. This is not a civil matter. With respect, Your Honor, the company in question was a joint marital venture. The victim is now attempting to take control of assets that were built with my client's expertise and connections, exploiting a technical discrepancy in the paperwork. The technical discrepancy being that your client forged his wife's signature on multiple legal documents. Judge Meridian's tone could have frozen nitrogen. Bail is set at $500,000. Mr. Chen will surrender his passport and wear an ankle monitor. Next case. As Marcus was let out, his eyes found mine across the courtroom. The rage in them was palpable, a living thing that promised retribution. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. I'd forgotten about the media until cameras flashed and microphones thrust toward me. Mrs. Chen, is it true you're taking over your husband's company? Mrs. Chen, are you filing for divorce? Mrs. Chen, sources say your husband was having an affair. Is this revenge? Diana materialized beside me, her hand on my elbow, guiding me toward her car. No comment. Mrs. Chen is cooperating with federal investigators and has no statement at this time. But the damage was done. By noon, my name was trending on local news sites. By evening, think pieces were appearing online. Scorned wife or corporate opportunist. When identity theft becomes identity assumption, the ethics of taking over a stolen company. I turned off my phone after the 20th call from reporters and sat in my darkened living room, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Rebecca had warned me about visibility, about vulnerability, about everyone having an opinion. But the reality of being dissected by strangers was more brutal than I'd imagined. A knock at the door made me jump. Through the security camera, I saw Patricia Brennan standing on my porch, holding a bottle of wine and a bag of takeout food. I saw the news, she said when I opened the door. Figured you could use some company from someone who understands. We sat at my kitchen table, eating Thai food and drinking wine, while Patricia told me stories about the aftermath of her own battle with Marcus. The reporters who'd called her crazy. The friends who'd dropped her because it was easier than believing someone they liked could be a criminal. The slow, grinding process of rebuilding her reputation and her life. It gets better, she said finally. Not easier, exactly. But you develop a thicker skin. You learn who your real allies are. And eventually, the noise dies down and you're left with your actual life, not the story other people tell about you. How long did it take? I asked. For the noise to die down? About 6 months. For me to actually believe I hadn't done something wrong? Longer. She refilled our wine glasses. But here's the difference between your situation and mine. You have evidence. You have the FBI on your side. You have a good lawyer and a clear case. I had nothing but my word against his, and his word was backed by expensive attorneys and forged documents. After she left, I sat on my back porch, listening to the night sounds of my neighborhood. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Richard Yamamoto and the other investors. The day after that, the company-wide meeting with MedTech Innovations employees. And somewhere in all of it, I'd need to figure out how to be the person this situation demanded. Strong enough to weather the criticism, smart enough to make good decisions, and clear-eyed enough to know the difference between justice and revenge. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you've won, but this is just beginning. I built that company? I know where all the bodies are buried. Walk away now or you'll regret it. Marcus, clearly, using a burner phone or someone else's device. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the old fear try to creep back in. The fear of his anger, his retribution, his ability to make me doubt my own reality. Then I forwarded the message to Agent Morrison and Diana, blocked the number, and went to bed, because the old Evelyn might have been frightened by threats. But the woman I was becoming had learned something important in that courtroom. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And Marcus had shown me exactly who he was, a man who built empires on stolen identities and expected to face no consequences. Well, consequences had arrived, and I was done being afraid of them. The meeting with Richard Yamamoto and his investment team took place in a glass-walled conference room that felt uncomfortably exposed. 3 venture capitalists sat across from me, Rebecca beside me with her legal pad and practiced calm. Mrs. Chen, Yamamoto began, I'll be direct. We've completed independent due diligence on MedTech's technology, separate from the fraud investigation. The device works. The market need is real. But we have serious concerns about the viability of a company built on criminal foundations. I understand, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. However, he continued, we're impressed by your transparency. Most people in your position would have either fled or tried to cover up the fraud. You've done neither. He slid a folder across the table. This is a revised term sheet. We're prepared to invest an additional $1 million, contingent on 3 conditions. You bring in an experienced interim CEO, you implement new governance structures with independent board oversight, and you agree to step back from operational decisions. I reviewed the terms carefully. They were fair, even generous given the circumstances. And what about Marcus? He's made it clear he intends to fight for control. Marcus has no legal standing, Rebecca interjected. The company is registered in your name. His fraud invalidates any claims he might make to intellectual property or ownership. One of the other investors, a woman named Dr. Lisa Fernandez, leaned forward. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask, why are you doing this? You could walk away, take a settlement from your divorce, and never think about medical devices again. Why take on this fight? I thought about the question for a long moment, about all the easy answers I could give. Because it was the right thing to do. Because innocent employees deserved stability. Because Marcus needed to face consequences, but the truth was more complicated than that. Because I spent 7 years being told I wasn't smart enough, capable enough, valuable enough, I said finally. And then I discovered that while he was diminishing me, he was using my identity to build something real. Something that actually works and could help people. I met her eyes directly. I'm not doing this to spite Marcus. I'm doing this to prove to myself that I'm more than his version of me. Dr. Fernandez smiled. That's the best answer you could have given. We're in. The company-wide meeting at MedTech Innovations was scheduled for Thursday morning. Rebecca had helped me prepare remarks, but standing in front of 12 people whose livelihoods depended on my decisions, every prepared word fled my mind. I'm Evelyn Chen, I began, my voice echoing slightly in the small office space. Most of you know me as the name on the incorporation papers. The CEO you've never met. And there's a reason for that. I didn't know this company existed until 2 weeks ago. I laid out the truth without softening it. The fraud, the forged signatures, Marcus's arrest, my complete lack of involvement. Faces around the room cycled through shock, anger, and fear. I understand if you want to leave, I continued. I understand if you can't trust a company that started this way. But I also want you to know that the technology you've built is real. The work you've done matters. And I'm committed to legitimizing this company and giving you the stable foundation you deserve. Dr. Sarah Kowalski stood up. I've spent the last 3 days reviewing every contract, every agreement, every technical specification. The work we've done is solid. But I need to know, are you serious about running this company, or are you just trying to stick it to your ex-husband? I'm serious, I said, which is why I'm bringing in an interim CEO with actual healthcare experience while I maintain board oversight. I don't know anything about medical devices, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I do know when something is worth fighting for. A younger man in the back raised his hand. What about the investors? Are they pulling out? No. They're increasing their investment, contingent on new governance structures and transparent operations. I pulled out copies of the revised term sheet. Sarah, I'd like you to review this with the team. And I'd like to schedule one-on-one meetings with each of you over the next week to answer questions and hear your concerns. The meeting ended without the mass exodus I'd feared. Though several employees left looking shell-shocked, Sarah approached me as the room emptied. That took guts, she said. Most people would have sent a memo or had a lawyer do the talking. They deserved to hear it from me, I replied. Even if I am just the name on the fraudulent paperwork. Sarah smiled slightly. You're more than that now. Question is, are you ready for what comes next? What came next arrived faster than I expected. That afternoon, while I was meeting with a potential interim CEO candidate, Diana called with news that changed everything. Marcus violated his bail conditions, she said without preamble. He tried to access MedTech's servers remotely last night. The FBI's cybersecurity team caught him attempting to delete files and transfer intellectual property to offshore accounts. What does that mean? I asked, though I could guess. It means his bail is revoked. He's back in custody, and the prosecutor is adding additional charges: obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and attempted theft of corporate assets. Diana paused. Evelyn, this is good for us. It shows a pattern of deliberate criminal behavior, not just a one-time mistake, but it also means Marcus is desperate. Desperate people do unpredictable things. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks later, but I never made it to the courtroom. 3 days before the trial date, Gerald Hutchinson called Diana with a settlement offer. Marcus is willing to plead guilty to the fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, Diana explained, reviewing the terms. He'll sign away all claims to MedTech Innovations, agree to the divorce with no contested assets, and provide full cooperation with investigators about his previous fraud schemes. What's the sentence? I asked. 30 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, full restitution to all victims, including Patricia Brennan. Diana looked up from the papers. It's a good deal, Evelyn. It guarantees he faces consequences without putting you through the ordeal of a trial. I thought about the satisfaction of watching him squirm on the witness stand, of hearing a jury pronounce him guilty, of getting to make a victim impact statement. But I also thought about moving forward instead of looking back. I want one more condition, I said. A formal public apology, on the record, admitting what he did and acknowledging the harm he caused. Diana smiled. I'll see what I can do. The apology came 3 days later, read into the court record as part of Marcus's plea agreement. I sat in the back of the courtroom, listening to him speak words his lawyer had clearly written. I defrauded my wife, Evelyn Chen, by using her identity without her knowledge or consent to establish a business entity. I forged her signature on multiple legal documents. I hid assets during our divorce proceedings. I attempted to destroy evidence when caught. These actions were wrong, and I take full responsibility for them. His voice was flat, defeated. When he finished, his eyes found mine across the courtroom. There was no rage left in them, no defiance. Just exhaustion and the hollow realization that he'd destroyed his own life through his own choices. I felt nothing. Not triumph, not vindication, not even satisfaction. Just a quiet certainty that this chapter was finally closing. 6 months after that courtroom confrontation, I stood in a hospital in Houston, watching the first patient receive a MedTech remote monitoring device. The woman was in her 70s, recovering from heart surgery, and the device would allow her doctors to track her vitals in real time without requiring constant hospital visits. This is going to change my life, she said, tears in her eyes. I can go home to my grandchildren instead of sitting in a hospital bed. Dr. Sarah Kowalski, now our permanent chief operating officer, stood beside me. We'd brought in an experienced CEO named Michael Torres, a former hospital administrator with 20 years in medical device development. Under his leadership, MedTech had expanded to 5 hospital systems and was in talks with 3 more. You did this, Sarah said quietly. You could have walked away, but you didn't. We did this, I corrected. I just made it possible. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks after Marcus began serving his sentence. I kept the house, received a significant settlement from marital assets Marcus couldn't hide, and walked away with full ownership of MedTech Innovations. Helen never spoke to me again, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Florida to be closer to Marcus's prison. Patricia Brennan received full restitution for her losses and had her credit restored. She'd started her own consulting firm again, and we'd become unlikely friends, bonded by the shared experience of being underestimated and fighting back. 1 year after that courtroom scene, I received a letter from Marcus. It had been screened by prison officials and forwarded by Diana, who'd included a note. You don't have to read this, but I thought you should know it exists. I sat in my home office, the same room where I'd once hidden from his mocking guests, and opened the envelope. "Evelyn," it began in Marcus's precise handwriting. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I did to you, to Patricia, to everyone I hurt. My therapist says I need to make amends, to take responsibility without expecting forgiveness. So this isn't me asking you to forgive me. This is me saying I'm sorry. I called you stupid because I needed you to believe you were. If you believed you were worthless, you wouldn't question why you never saw our financial statements, why I kept you isolated from my work, why I controlled every aspect of our life together. I made you small because I needed to feel big. The truth is, you were never stupid. You were patient, kind, and trusting, qualities I mistook for weakness and exploited. You built a life from the ashes of my fraud, saved jobs I would have destroyed, and helped people I only pretended to care about. You proved everything I said about you was a lie I needed to believe. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding. I just wanted you to know that I see clearly now what I refused to see then. You were always stronger than me. You just didn't need to prove it until I forced you to. Marcus." I read the letter twice, then filed it away in a drawer with all the other documents from that period of my life. The apology was real, I thought. But it didn't change anything. The time for his remorse had passed. What mattered now was forward. At MedTech's second annual board meeting, we celebrated FDA approval for our next-generation monitoring device. The company was profitable, growing, and making a real difference in patients' lives. I'd learned enough about the industry to contribute meaningfully to strategic decisions, though I still relied heavily on Michael's expertise for operations. "You've come a long way from the woman who didn't know what a medical device was," Richard Yamamoto said during the reception afterward. "I've come a long way from a lot of things," I replied, watching our team celebrate their hard work. Diana approached with champagne, a rare smile on her usually serious face. "You should be proud, Evelyn. You took the worst betrayal imaginable and turned it into something meaningful." "I just tried to do the right thing," I said. "That's exactly why it worked." Diana clinked her glass against mine. "Because you weren't trying to win. You were just trying to be better than what he believed you were." That night, alone in the house that was finally just mine, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. Sitting in that courtroom, hearing the word stupid echo off the walls, feeling the weight of 7 years of diminishment settle around her like chains. I thought about how that word, intended to destroy me, had instead crystallized something essential. Had shown me exactly how far someone would go to keep me small. Had given me permission to finally take up space. Marcus had called me stupid, thinking it would keep me silent and submissive. Instead, it had woken something in me that refused to sleep again. The knowledge that I was capable, valuable, and powerful in ways he'd spent years trying to suppress. The irony was perfect. In his attempt to diminish me, he'd shown me exactly how much I'd been allowing myself to be diminished. And in revealing his fraud, he'd handed me the tools to build something real from his fake foundation. I opened my laptop and pulled up the speech I'd been asked to give at an upcoming conference on women in healthcare technology. The organizers had wanted to hear about overcoming fraud and building a company from scandal. But as I wrote, I realized the real story wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about the moment you stop accepting someone else's narrative about who you are. About the choice to stand up, speak truth, and refuse to make yourself smaller for someone else's comfort. About turning the weapons used against you into tools for building something better. The word stupid had been meant to silence me. Instead, it had given me a voice. I wrote until dawn, crafting a speech that was honest about the pain, clear-eyed about the challenges, and hopeful about what's possible when you refuse to accept someone else's limits. When I finished, I felt the final piece of the old Evelyn fall away, leaving someone I was still getting to know, but was beginning to respect. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Beta, test results are in. Our device reduced hospital readmissions by 40%. We're going to change healthcare." I smiled, thinking about that patient in Houston going home to her grandchildren, about the 12 employees who'd taken a chance on legitimizing a fraudulent company. About Patricia Brennan rebuilding her consulting practice. About everyone who'd been told they were too weak, too stupid, too damaged to succeed. We were proving them wrong, one monitored heartbeat at a time. And somewhere in a federal prison, Marcus was learning what I'd already discovered. That the person you underestimate most consistently is often the one who'll surprise you most completely. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation. It's taking everything someone tried to steal from you, your identity, your confidence, your future, and building something they never imagined possible. That courtroom moment, when he'd called me stupid in front of a judge, had been meant as the final blow to my self-worth. Instead, it had been the catalyst for my becoming someone he never believed I could be. Successful, independent, and utterly free from his opinion of my worth. I saved my speech, closed my laptop, and watched the sunrise paint my office walls gold. There was work to do, a company to run, lives to impact. But for this moment, I let myself simply exist in the quiet satisfaction of having turned his cruelty into my strength. The word stupid no longer had any power over me. And neither did he. That was the real victory. Not his imprisonment or my success, but my complete liberation from needing his approval or fearing his judgment. I'd reclaimed not just my identity, but my sense of self-worth that he'd spent years trying to erode. Some endings are neat and satisfying. Others are messy and complex. Mine was both. The legal resolution was clear, but the emotional journey was ongoing. I was still learning who I was without his voice in my head, still discovering what I was capable of when no one was telling me I couldn't. But every day got easier. Every decision I made reinforced my own judgment. Every success proved I'd been right to fight instead of flee. And every time I walked into MedTech's offices, I remembered that sometimes the best thing you can do with a foundation built on fraud is to rebuild it with truth. Not because it's easy, but because it's possible. Because you're stronger than anyone, including yourself, ever believed. That was the lesson Marcus had accidentally taught me. At the cost of his freedom and his future, never underestimate someone just because you've convinced them to underestimate themselves. Eventually, they'll wake up. And when they do, they'll be unstoppable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.